What if the reason you haven't reached your potential yet has nothing to do with discipline, motivation, talent, or luck? What if the real limitation isn't something you lack, but something you believe so deeply that you've never questioned it? Most people spend their lives chasing productivity hacks, confidence tricks, and motivation boosts. They work harder, push longer, and burn out faster, all while wondering why progress feels fragile. One bad result, one failure, one criticism, and suddenly everything collapses. Confidence disappears. Motivation dries up. Effort feels pointless. This video is not about how to work harder. It's not about being more positive. And it's definitely not about pretending you can do anything if you just believe enough. This is about identifying the hidden mental traps that quietly sabotage growth and rebuilding a mindset that makes progress inevitable instead of exhausting. If you understand this, effort becomes sustainable, failure becomes useful, and success stops feeling like something that can vanish overnight. Let's start with a hard truth most people don't want to hear. The biggest enemy of long-term success is not laziness. It is the belief that who you are today defines what you can become tomorrow. Many people think success comes from traits like intelligence, creativity, confidence, or natural ability. They look at high achievers and assume something special was baked into them from birth. And when people believe this, they unknowingly place a ceiling over their lives. They try just hard enough to protect their self-image, but not hard enough to transform it. This belief shows up in subtle ways. I'm just not a math person. I'm not creative. I'm bad at speaking. I'm not built for leadership. These statements sound harmless, honest even, but they act like mental contracts, agreements you sign with yourself that quietly limit what you attempt, how you respond to setbacks, and how much discomfort you're willing to tolerate. Here's the mistake most people make. They think effort proves weakness. They think struggle means they're not meant for something. They think failure is evidence of limitation, not part of development. And that single interpretation changes everything. Let me tell you about a pattern that repeats everywhere, from schools to careers to relationships. When people believe ability is fixed, they become obsessed with proving themselves. Every task becomes a test. Every mistake feels like exposure. Every challenge threatens identity. So they choose safe paths, avoid difficulty, and disengage the moment things get uncomfortable. On the surface, it looks like a lack of motivation. In reality, it's self-protection. When your identity is tied to being smart, talented, or naturally good, failure isn't just failure. It becomes a verdict on who you are. So the mind does something clever. It avoids situations where growth would actually happen. This is why so many people quit just before progress compounds. This is why potential stays theoretical. This is why talent without resilience collapses under pressure. Now let's flip the perspective. There is another way people interpret effort, struggle, and failure. In this view, ability is not something you have or don't have. It is something you build. Intelligence is not a fixed quantity. Skill is not an inherited trait. Confidence is not a personality type. They are all outcomes of process. When someone believes this, effort stops being embarrassing. It becomes expected. Struggle stops being threatening. It becomes informative. Failure stops being personal. It becomes data. And here's the critical shift most people miss. This isn't just a motivational idea. It's biological. Your brain physically changes in response to challenge. Neural connections strengthen when you push slightly beyond what you can do comfortably. Learning literally reshapes structure. When you avoid difficulty, the brain stagnates. When you engage with it intentionally, the brain adapts. This means growth is not about willpower. It's about interpretation. Two people can face the same obstacle. One interprets it as proof they're not capable. The other interprets it as proof they're in the right zone for growth. Over time, these interpretations create completely different lives. Let's talk about one of the most damaging mistakes people make without realizing it: tying self-worth to performance. When your value depends on outcomes, every result carries emotional weight. Good results inflate ego. Bad results crush it. This creates a fragile confidence that only survives when conditions are perfect. But real growth requires imperfection. It requires repeated exposure to being bad at something long enough to become good at it. And you cannot sustain that process if your identity is on the line every time you try. This is why some people seem fearless. Not because they don't feel fear, but because their self-worth isn't being tested every time they fail. They separate who they are from what they're currently capable of. Here's where most people get stuck. They think adopting a growth mindset means lying to themselves, pretending everything is possible, or ignoring limitations. That's not what this is. A real growth mindset is brutally honest. It acknowledges current limitations clearly, but it refuses to treat them as permanent. Instead of saying, "I can't do this," it says, "I can't do this yet." Instead of asking, "Am I good at this?" it asks, "How do I get better at this?" Instead of avoiding challenge, it seeks the right level of difficulty. This changes how effort feels. Effort stops being a desperate attempt to prove worth. It becomes an investment, and investments are allowed to take time. Let's go deeper, because this mindset doesn't just affect learning or careers. It affects relationships, health, leadership, and even conflict. In relationships, people with fixed beliefs about personality assume people don't change. They label themselves and others as emotional, bad communicators, distant, or difficult. Over time, these labels become scripts. Growth becomes impossible because effort feels pointless. But when people believe emotional skills can be developed, conversations change. Conflict becomes a skill gap, not a character flaw. Effort becomes a sign of care, not weakness. In health, people who believe fitness or discipline is something you either have or don't have quit the moment progress slows. People who see it as trainable adjust, refine, and continue. In leadership, managers who believe talent is fixed hoard control, avoid feedback, and fear being challenged. Leaders who believe people grow invest in coaching, tolerate mistakes, and build stronger teams. Even in social conflicts, studies show that when groups believe identities and attitudes can change, hostility decreases and cooperation increases. When people believe change is impossible, conflict hardens. Now let's address the most dangerous misunderstanding about mindset. Having a growth mindset does not mean always feeling motivated. It means knowing what to do when motivation disappears. People with a fixed mindset interpret loss of motivation as a sign to stop. People with a growth mindset interpret it as a signal to adjust strategy, environment, or expectations. This is why resilience isn't something you force. It emerges naturally when failure doesn't threaten identity. Here's something powerful you can start doing immediately. Start listening to your internal language. The words you use internally shape the limits you accept. When you hear yourself say, "I'm just not good at this," pause. Ask yourself whether that statement is describing the present or predicting the future. Most of the time, it's doing both without evidence. Replace judgment with process. Instead of "I failed," ask, "What didn't work?" Instead of, I'm bad at this, ask, what skill is missing? Instead of, I'll never get this, ask, what step comes next? This is not positive thinking. It's accurate thinking. Growth happens when beliefs align with how learning actually works. Now, let's talk about how people unintentionally sabotage others, especially children, students, and teammates without meaning to. When we praise people for being smart, talented, or gifted, we think we're building confidence. What we're actually doing is tying identity to performance. We're teaching them that success means being something, not doing something. When difficulty appears, they don't think, I need to try harder. They think, maybe I'm not who I thought I was. But when praise focuses on effort, strategy, and persistence, something changes. People become more willing to take on challenges because success no longer depends on protecting an identity. It depends on engaging a process. This applies to how you talk to yourself, too. If you constantly judge yourself based on outcomes, you reinforce fragility. If you evaluate yourself based on engagement and learning, you build resilience. Here's the most important insight of all. Mindset is not a personality trait. It's a habit of interpretation, and habits can be changed. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need more confidence. You don't need to eliminate fear. You need to stop confusing current ability with future potential. Growth doesn't require believing you're special. It requires believing you're adaptable. So here's the question I want to leave you with. What are the areas of your life where you've quietly decided, this is just how I am? And what would change if you treated those areas not as fixed traits, but as skills under construction? Because the moment you stop defending who you are, you finally become free to build who you could be. And that shift changes everything.